Welcome back. Hope you're all doing well out there. In today's video, we will be discussing the death of former Dodgers pitcher Fernando Valenzuela, who just last year had his number retired with the Los Angeles Dodgers. Like clockwork, the player from a team that's in a championship, the Los Angeles Dodgers, who just earned their right to play in the World Series 2 days before the death of Fernando Valenzuela, who is a pitcher that spent many years with the Dodgers and was celebrated as recently as last year by the team. In this video, we're going to talk about how the death of Fernando Valenzuela connects to a special teammate of his, but we'll also look at how this connects to another famous Fernando Alonso, who goes racing in Mexico this weekend, which is the home nation of the legendary Dodgers pitcher. Now, as always, we'll be looking at the language of Gematria in this video, with a special emphasis on the ciphers you see on the screen right now. This all points to Standard and Latin Gematria, the two large number methods, which we will use to decode the news from this week. Now, Fernando Valenzuela holds a special distinction in the history of Major League Baseball, because back on June 29th of 1990, he and a player named Dave Stewart both threw no-hitters on the same day. And this is the only time in the history of Major League Baseball that this has happened. But that's not the only coincidence involved with this. Both of these players, Valenzuela and Stewart, used to play on the same team together. In fact, both of them were members of the 1981 championship Los Angeles Dodgers team, who defeated the New York Yankees in the World Series. And now in 2024, it's the first time the Dodgers have played the Yankees in the World Series since that season. Furthermore, for their no-hitters, both pitchers were wearing number 34. Notice how in Gematria, number 34 sums to 199. So does the full name of his former teammate, David Keith Stewart, also 199. This represents the year that this occurred, 1990. With both men wearing number 34, it's worth noting that Fernando Valenzuela has now passed away 34 years later. And later on in this video, we're going to look at the, quote, murder code and how the numbers of the word murder are coded into this story. And you'll notice that the word murder sums to 34. The name Dave Stewart is what points us to Formula One for this weekend. The name Stewart has essentially the same etymology as the word steward. And in motor racing, the officials are called racing stewards. And all week, ever since the United States Grand Prix last Sunday, the news has been railing on the F1 stewards, who seem to be biased and inconsistent in their judgments and ruined the race for a lot of fans last weekend. So it's been all about the stewards. So Fernando Valenzuela, a pitcher who was born in Mexico, dies just 5 days before Formula One goes racing at the Mexico City Grand Prix to be held on October 27th. And Valenzuela shares a first name with one of the F1 drivers, the oldest driver on the grid, two-time world champion Fernando Alonso. Notice how Alonso was born in the year 1981, which is the same year that the Dodgers last played the Yankees in the World Series. To strengthen this connection, Valenzuela died on the date October 22nd, And October 22nd is a special date to Fernando Alonso because in 2006, he became the youngest two-time champion in the history of F1 on the date October 22nd at that year's Brazilian Grand Prix, the finale of the season. Fernando Diaz's full name, or Alonso's full name, sorry, is Fernando Alonso Diaz. And in the alphabetic order, this name sums to 193. Well, these two pitchers who threw a no-hitter on the same day were born exactly 193 weeks apart from each other. But let's look again at this number 1981, because this is going to bring us to the next part of the decode. In Latin Gematria, or Agrippa's key, which I claim is the most significant cipher in Gematria, the number 120 sums to 1981 when you spell it out. And this is the next big number of this decode. This Sunday's race in Mexico City falls 120 days after the anniversary of Valenzuela's and Stewart's no-hitter. When Valenzuela died, it was also 120 days before the birthday of his former teammate, Dave Stewart. In the alphabetic order in Gematria, the sport that we're discussing, Formula One, sums to 120. And this is, of course, a huge number for this year's World Series, because the Dodgers and Yankees tomorrow night will begin the 120th edition of the World Series. On top of that, it's also the 12th World Series between the Dodgers and the Yankees. Now, the number 120 brings us to the connection between Valenzuela and the Dodgers, because when Fernando first signed with LA back in 1979, the Dodgers paid $120,000 for the rights to his contract. And in doing so, they bought him out from the Mexican League. Notice here how Mexican equals 120. So again, this week we have the Mexican Grand Prix in Mexico City. Well, wouldn't you know, the first ever Mexican Grand Prix in the history of Formula One was the 120th Grand Prix in the history of the sport. And it says it was the second Mexican Grand Prix, but the first one was non-championship. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Because the racetrack that this Mexican Grand Prix is held at is named after the Rodriguez brothers, particularly Ricardo Rodriguez, who died at this very track a year before F1 started racing there. And also in reverse gematria, the name Rodriguez equals 120. Now, the date Fernando Valenzuela died, October 22nd, is a span of exactly 120 weeks after the destruction of the Georgia Guidestones, which will be a big topic of this video. The Georgia Guidestones stood just inside the path of totality for the 2017 total solar eclipse. You can still see them on Google Earth, even though they are no longer standing in real life. But the big riddle with this Guidestone destruction is that it's connected to the eclipse code. And in Gematria, the word eclipse also equals 120. So just to quickly recap all the 120s here. 120 equals 1981. And this is obviously an extremely significant number to this riddle. So in 1979, Valenzuela signs with the Dodgers, and the Guidestones open in Georgia a year later, the same year that Fernando makes his major league debut. And then a year after that, Fernando Alonso is born and the Dodgers win the World Series. Fast forward over 40 years later, and the Guidestones get destroyed in 2022, 1 year before Valenzuela has his number retired by the Dodgers. And then a year after that, the former pitcher is now dead at the age of 63. So the Yankees and Dodgers last met 43 years ago. And think about how this is the opposite of the number on Fernando's jersey, 34. 34, 43. In fact, Fernando Alonso, if I'm not mistaken, notice how he's currently 43 years old, and he drives the number 14 car. Well, the number 43 is the 14th prime number. Now, when Fernando Valenzuela first signed with the Los Angeles Dodgers back in 1979, it was on the date July 6th. Well, July 6th is the date that the Georgia Guidestones were destroyed, exactly 43 years later. Also consider how George W. Bush was the 43rd president. George Bush, a member of the Skull and Bones Society. The word pitcher sums to 43 in reduction as well. The 43rd prime number, 191, is the gematria of the Dodgers' opponents, the New York Yankees, 191, just like Society of Jesus, which I've been talking about a lot on this channel. We'll also be looking at driver Ricardo Rodriguez equals 191. Now, another thing that's interesting is that if you saw the last video on my channel, you'll notice I put F1 driver Liam Lawson in the thumbnail, because he debuted the same week that singer Liam Payne died. So there was a big link with these two men. Well, when Liam Payne debuted as a full-time driver last week, he got into a bunch of different arguments with Fernando Alonso, both on and off track. Alonso, the old, the seasoned grizzly wolf of the bunch, showing the rookie the ropes. And it's interesting that, Liam was the focus of last week, and now we're talking about Alonso. So on the date that Fernando Valenzuela and Dave Stewart threw their no-hitters on the same day in 1990, Fernando Alonso was exactly 107 months old. In the reverse cipher, no-hitter equals 107. The first no-hitter that day was thrown by David Keith Stewart, whose name equals 107. And then Fernando Valenzuela threw one for the team from Los Angeles, California, which also gives us a 107. Fernando Alonso was also exactly 8 years and 11 months old on that date. And this brings us to Hermanos Rodriguez, the Rodriguez brothers, who the track is named after. Now, there's a couple of more quick connections with Alonso here. The name Fernando Alonso equals 63 in reduction. This is the age that Valenzuela was when he passed away. Also, the other pitcher, Dave Stewart, notice how his nickname is Smoke. And in ordinal, the nickname Smoke sums to 63. Now, I mentioned how Valenzuela died 120 weeks after the Georgia Guidestones were destroyed. But if you do not include the end date, it was still 119 weeks. And think about how the number 119 is coded into this as well. The name Valenzuela sums to 119 in the alphabetic order. And when he signed with the Dodgers, it was a span of 119 days before his birthday. The name Fernando has gematria of 1019. In Spanish, the name of this weekend's race in Mexico is 1019. And Georgia Guidestones has matching 1019 gematria with New Haven. New Haven, which is where Yale University is located. And Yale University, home to the Skull and Bone Society. And Fernando Alonso, as I've discussed for quite a while on this channel, is connected to this Skull and Bones code because one of the two founders of Skull and Bones was named Alfonso. Alfonso died in 1891, whereas Alonso was born in 1981. Don't forget the other founder of Skull and Bones is named William Russell. And there's another F1 driver named George William Russell who started his career with the Williams team. So a lot of syncs here. I got more on my blog if you want to find them. But what I want to look at is this racetrack where everything happens this weekend. It's called Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, and it's named after the Rodriguez brothers, both of whom were killed during crashes at a race. But what we're going to be focusing on is Ricardo Rodriguez. Because of these two brothers, he's the one who was killed at this very racetrack, just 1 year before F1 started racing there. Now, you'll notice I put a heart there between his first and last name. And on this channel, I've been talking a lot about the heart, chakra, and love themes that have been playing out, really ever since the start of the NFL season, which began in Brazil. Well, Ricardo Rodriguez's middle name is Valentin, like Valentine, and he was born on February 14th, or Valentine's Day. So I thought that was worth noting in light of everything I've been sharing on this channel. Now, if you include the word "and" with this number 120, notice how you get gematria of 2026. And Fernando Alonso, who is from Spain, is signed to drive through 2026. Notice how the name Fernando is 226. And in the year 2026, we have a total solar eclipse that ends over the country of Spain. For the geographically challenged, that's the country underneath this path of totality here. Valenzuela died a span of 660 days before that eclipse. The word pitcher equals 660. Eclipse equals 66, and this eclipse falls on a date with primary numerology of 66. So we're going to be looking at three drivers. Of course, we're focusing on Alonso, but it is worth mentioning that there's one other Spanish driver on the grid, Carlos Sainz, and there's also a Mexican driver, Sergio Perez. So we'll be glancing at these two numbers, but as I pointed out, it's definitely all about Fernando Alonso. So on the date he died, measuring from his birth to his death, Fernando Valenzuela was exactly 3,338 weeks old when he passed away. In the alphabetic order, the name of the racetrack, Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, sums to 338. This is also the gematria of his teammate, David Keith Stewart. Georgia Guidestones sums to 338. So does Fernandomania. And this is what the the fervor that was sweeping over the fan base in 1981 was called Fernandomania. It also sums to 338. And consider how Spain and Mexico are both Spanish-speaking countries. The word Spanish, also 338. To make this connection even stronger, Fernando Valenzuela was born on November 1st. The first Rodriguez brother to be killed, Ricardo, died on the date November 1st, exactly 2 years after Fernando Valenzuela was born. These digits in his birthday, 11-1, well, consider how Mexico City Grand Prix equals 111. In fact, when Fernando signed with the Dodgers, he did so on a date with numerology of 111. In the alphabetic order, Mexico City equals 126. The only Mexican driver on the grid was born on January 26th, or 126. Fernando Valenzuela died exactly 1,206 weeks after the September 11th attacks, and September 11th equals 1260. Well, on Fernando's birthday this year, notice how his birthday, November 1st, is the first day of Brown lunation number 1260. But of course, there's more. Earlier, I pointed out how this is all synced up with the destruction of the Georgia Guidestones. And think about the name George in connection to Skull and Bones, right? George Bush, both presidents 41 and 43. George Washington, the first U.S. president. Well, if you measure from the destruction of the Georgia Guidestones to the date that Fernando had his number retired by the Dodgers last year, August 11th, his ceremony was 1 year, 1 month, and 5 days after the Guidestones came down. And this is all about Fernandomania, the quoted word in the headlines. Fernandomania equals 115. And this is a number we're accustomed to seeing in stories about death, because the word killing has this unusual trait where it sums to 115 in multiple ciphers. Fernando died 115 days after the anniversary of his only no-hitter. And yeah, shout out to the chat. The Mets have a key player named Pete Alonso. And I put that in my post, but I forgot to mention it. In order to get to the World Series, the Dodgers had to beat Pete Alonso. So that's a great observation. Thanks for pointing that out. Fernando Alonso was born 10 months and 15 days after Fernando Valenzuela's Major League debut. Fernando dead 1,015 days before the eclipse over Egypt. That eclipse is in 2027, which is a number that connects the two Fernandos. Born 20 years and 270 days apart. Total eclipse in Hebrew has the 227. Fernando dead on October 22nd, which equals 2027. Speaking of eclipses, the word eclipse equals 33. Now, Fernando Alonso, for over 11 years now, has been sitting on 32 career wins. And that's a good number for him because both Alonso and Spanish sum to 32 in Gematria. Now, don't misinterpret this decode. I do not think Alonso is going to win. It's virtually impossible for him to do that. For Fernando to win this weekend, I think like Sergio Perez would have to crash into the 7 cars in front of him and take them all out. Like, it's almost impossible. But Fernando, if he ever does get his 33rd win, his next win would be his 33rd. And notice how Mexico and Mexican both equal 33. I point this out because the 33rd prime number is 137, and this is an important number to Fernando Valenzuela. His number was retired 1 year and 37 days after the Guidestones were bombed. And his full name sums to 137. In fact, he was exactly 1,037 weeks old when he made his major league debut. And then when he played in his last MLB game, that was on a date with numerology of 137. His last game was on July 14th, or 7/14. His last name, Valenzuela, sums to 714 in Sumerian Gematria. And when he played his first MLB game, it was during Brown Lunation 714. So his career has a lot of 33 numerology with it as well. And what about this connection? In the capitals mixed method of Gematria, also called the classroom cipher, which contains all 52 characters, capital and small letters, the name Fernando Valenzuela sums to 578 reverse. Fernando Alonso was exactly 578 sidereal months old when Valenzuela died. For the next part of this video, we're going to talk about this murder and skull and bones code that's highly prevalent. And let's start with the gematria of the word murder. So Fernando Valenzuela signs with the Dodgers in the year 79. In fact, he did it on 7/6, and 6 is an upside-down 9. The name Fernando Valenzuela equals 79 in reduction. And he was one of the team's best pitchers. The word pitcher equals 79. Now check out the gematria of this headline. And I don't even always do this, but sometimes the headline looks to be worded a little awkwardly. And I just think, what if I dump this in the calculator and find out what it equals? Well, look at this. 790 in the alphabetic order. This headline about Fernandomania. But not only do you get the 790, but you also get 340. Well, the word murder equals 34 in reduction. This is the number that Valenzuela wore while playing for the Dodgers. He died 34 years after his no-hitter. And the only Mexican F1 driver was also born in 1990, that same year, so he's also 34 years old. The name Fernando equals the 34th prime number. But I want to look at the gematria of murder in 3 other ciphers. Check this out. Notice how murder has matching 317 gematria with Dodgers. Valenzuela made his major league debut 317 days before Fernando Alonso was born. And then he dies 529 months after his debut. Well, the word murder equals 529. The word murder also equals 399. Well, isn't it interesting that Fernando Alonso has been involved in 399 Grand Prix? the most of any driver in history. When Alonso won his first ever Drivers' Championship, Valenzuela had the 399 in his age. But in addition to the murder code, let's look at how the skull and bones code is also very important to this. We start with the last name Valenzuela. Valenzuela equals 2137 with square numbers. 2137 is the 322nd prime number. 322, the number on the emblem for skull and bones. When Valenzuela passed away, it was 30,202 days after driver Ricardo Rodriguez was born. Skull and Bones was founded in the year 1832. When Fernando Valenzuela threw his only no-hitter, he was 10,832 days of age. And then he played in his final game 2,572 days later. Well, 572 is the Latin Gematria of skull and bones. With the ampersand, skull and bones is 527. And Valenzuela had the 527 in his age when the Guidestones were bombed. Skull and Crossbones sums to 223 in the alphabetic order, the reverse of 322. Dodgers equals 223 with Fibonacci numbers. And would you believe this? When the Dodgers retired Fernando's number, they did it in the year 2023 on the 223rd day of the year. In fact, Fernando Alonso was born 2 years and 23 days after Fernando Valenzuela signed with the Dodgers. With capital letters, the Guidestones equals 223. And of course, the Georgia Guidestones first opened to the public on the date 322 or 223 if you live overseas. So the Guidestones were destroyed on the date 7/6. And what's so super significant about this date is that 7/6 was the 76th birthday of George W. Bush, who also has the 7/6 birthday. In Gematria, skull and bones sums to 76. When you write out his full name, Fernando Alonso Diaz, it sums to the 76th prime number. And he's a driver from Spain, which equals 76. Valenzuela signing with the Dodgers on 7/6. Now, when the Georgia Guidestones were bombed, not only was it also on 7/6, but it was 15,706 days after Fernando signed with the Dodgers. And if you measure between the two birthdays of the two Fernandos, you get 7,576 days. Valenzuela passed away on a date with primary numerology of 76. Human sacrifice, blood sacrifice, both 76. And look at the name Alonso. Alonso equals 76. Well, Alonso also equals 86. And consider this, like 86, a term for offing someone or getting rid of something. Not only does Alonso equal 86, but Spanish also 86. Well, Fernando Valenzuela died 86 days after Alonso's birthday. And it was 86 months after the Great American Eclipse that passed over the Georgia Guidestones. So this eclipse from 2017 to the date of his death, 86 months and just 1 day. Now, don't forget, there was another total solar eclipse this year over the United States. And that one happened on April 8th, completing the crossbones, so to speak, over the U.S. Well, if you measure from that eclipse to the date Fernando Valenzuela died, you get 197 days. Los Angeles, California, 197. He died at the age of 63, which has the 197. And the word moon, also 197. Now, if you saw my work on Pete Rose, you remember Metonic cycle equals 197. 19 years equals 197. That's the length of the Metonic cycle. Every 19 years, 7 of them have a 13th month. 13th month equals 197. So, it's interesting we got the death of Pete Rose right before all of this. Again, check my video out on Pete Rose, also stream number 87, where we talk about the Metonic cycle and the number 197 with all of that. Here's another good one, is that when the Georgia Guidestones were destroyed, it was during Brown Lunation 1231. And 1231 is the 202nd prime number. And this is perfect because Skull and Bones equals 202. But so does total solar eclipse. That also equals 202. Ritual human sacrifice in Latin, 202. Well, isn't it interesting that Fernando Valenzuela's Major League Baseball career lasted a span of exactly 202 months? Valenzuela retired with 173 career victories. Well, that's another number connected to Yale University, 173. And Fernando died 1 year and 73 days after his number was retired. This year's Mexican Grand Prix is on October 27th. And that means it's on the anniversary of the first ever Mexican Grand Prix, which was also on the date October 27th. So this means it's exactly 61 years later. Skull and Crossbones gives us the 61 in reduction. Skull and Bones, also known as the Brotherhood of Death, which sums to 187. Think about how this is like the homicide code, particularly in the state of California. Well, the Guidestones were destroyed on the 187th day of the year, the same date Fernando signed with LA. The date he died also leaves 70 days on the calendar. And Yale University equals 70 in reduction. Now, of course, last year, Yale had a very special anniversary, turning 322 years old in the year 2023. if you measure from that date to the death of the Dodgers pitcher, notice how you get 379 days. This is the 75th prime number. And I point this out because Fernando Alonso was born 7,575 days after Fernando Valenzuela. Retire equals 75, and Valenzuela retired his number last year. And what about this guy, Ricardo Rodriguez? Check out his full name in the extended methods of Gematria. His full name has double Gematria of 2820. And it's rare for anything to have the same value in both ciphers, but this is a wild number to share because in reverse Sumerian, the Brotherhood of Death sums to 282. Yale's October 9th anniversary is the 282nd day of the year. All right, so before I wrap this video up, I just want to look at a couple of more of the deeper connections with Fernando Alonso to everything that's going on, and then I may give you my pick. I'll be honest, the bets haven't been going so hot for me with Formula One over the last few races. What we're looking at here right now is my betting log for Formula One. So my channel, it's a little different than some other numerologists. It's full transparency here when it comes to sports betting. And I don't bet on every race. In fact, I didn't even start till June. Now, I bet on the Spanish Grand Prix, and I was looking at George Russell and Lewis Hamilton, and I bet on Lewis to win this race, but I lost. However, George Russell won the next race, and then Lewis Hamilton won the one after that. So I said, you know what, I think I'm onto something. And I started betting again, and I got an 18-1. Then I won one race at less than even money. And then I won a 12-1. So I was on an absolute red-hot streak here. However, I was wrong on the last 3 races. So for those of you looking to put money based on my picks, I mean, all indications are that I will be wrong again. But there's some pretty fascinating stuff lining up for a couple of drivers. So we can look at that. But first, a little bit more about how Alonso connects to all of this, because it's just crazy. These connections just never end. Now, earlier I pointed out how Alonso won his second championship on the 22nd of October, which is the same day now that Valenzuela's died. Well, this date, 2210, Alonso's full name sums to the 221st prime number. Now, Alonso won his first championship the year prior. And that year, he won it on September 25th. And this is another big number, 259, with Fernando Valenzuela. Consider how in Gematria, the number 259 equals 2006. So Fernando Alonso wins the 2005 championship on the 25th of September, 25-9, like 259, and then he wins the next championship in 2006 as well. When Fernando Valenzuela made his Major League debut, it was on the 259th day of a leap year. And he was also 7,259 days old. Well, in the alphabetic order, His full name equals 259. And now he's dead during Brown lunation number 1259. And look at the gematria of Yale University, 2059. Well, not only did Fernando Alonso win this championship on 25-9, but his age was also... Oh, I screwed that up. 1 second here. He was also a span of 24 years and 59 days old, so you got another 259 there. Oh, and when you write out the number 399, it also equals 259. And we talked about this earlier with the murder code, right? Murder 399, the number of races that Alonso has participated in. But check this out. When Fernando Valenzuela had his number retired last year, and Fernandomania lived once more, Fernando Alonso Diaz was 2,193 weeks old. And look at this gematria. Fernando Alonso Diaz, 193 and 293. This the 62nd prime number matching the date numerology of the ceremony. Well, Fernando Alonso Diaz also equals 85. And from that ceremony to Valenzuela's death was the 85th prime number of days. 439. So it seems like this coding just goes on forever. Now, if you want my pick for the race, there's a few drivers who have numbers that line up, as always. However, I do think this may be pointing to one of those drivers in particular. And it's not Fernando Alonso, because that would be too obvious with Fernando Valenzuela dying. But I'll riddle you this, okay? The driver that I put a small wager on, he turned 300 months old on the same day as the maiden victory for the godson of the last Formula One driver to have died from injuries sustained during a race. My other clue is that this driver's birth numerology matches the number of days between his birthday and the on-track death of a 3-time F1 champion. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why are you talking in riddles? Why don't you just give us your pick? Well, I'm kind of testing out a theory, right? Because, I've lost a lot recently. And if I had just bet $10 on every race, I would be way up this year, right? This would be my profit, $267. However, once I bet on these races and won, well, naturally I put more than $10 on these races, right? So, I'm not the smartest bettor when it comes to this stuff, at least not yet. But I still got a decent profit. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. If the driver I picked wins, I'll explain more about it. But either way, I'll do a post after everything is done. So stick around and check that out. Just let me check my notes here to see if I have anything else worth sharing. In regards to Valenzuela dying at the age of 63, I did want to note that the 1963 World Series was also between the Dodgers and Yankees, and the Dodgers swept that series. Now, I don't know if this means anything as it pertains to this year. I put a bet on the Dodgers to win when there were 4 teams left, because the Dodgers have incredible skull and bones connections. In fact, you know what? I might just show this on the screen here as well. Okay, so look at this. If the Dodgers win the World Series, it means they will have 11,572 total victories in franchise history. And that 572 is big. And this, I pointed this out to myself before the death of Valenzuela. But skull and bones equals 572. And this is the column I used to pick the Rangers last year. And I didn't actually even bet on the Rangers, nor did I pick them on the channel, but when I ran the numbers, I was like, oh, damn, it's lining up for the Rangers. And remember, last year was 2023, another big skull and bones year. In fact, let's look at the Rangers. What was it that I saw last year? I'm trying to remember. Oh, this was it. Bruce Bochy, the coach of the Rangers. So I think the riddle was that he entered the postseason with 2,137 wins. And I talked about this number earlier. 2,137, the 322nd prime number. And I was like, man, that's pretty interesting. And then sure enough, that's the team that went on to win the World Series. So there was more, but I've already gone way too long on this video. So I think I'm going to wrap things up there. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Please do feel free to like, share, subscribe, all that other good stuff. But for me, that'll do it for this one. Peace, love, God bless. And we'll talk to y'all next time. See ya.